There is a night that happens only once in the history of the world. A garden. Olive trees so old that Josephus, the Jewish historian, tells us they were already ancient in the 1st century. Gnarled and wide, their roots pressing down into stone ground outside the walls of Jerusalem. The city is asleep. Passover week. The air smells like smoke from the temple fires. And somewhere in the dark interior of that garden, a man is alone. His friends are 30 meters away, sleeping. He asked them to stay awake with him. They could not manage it. And in that garden, this man, who has healed the blind and walked on water and spoken creation into existence, falls on his face and begins to sweat blood. That is where this is going. But not yet, because to understand that garden, you have to understand something most people miss about the life of Jesus. You have to understand that the garden was not the first time. It was not even close to the first time. This is not a story about one bad night. This is not a story about weakness. This is not a story about a man who could not handle pressure. This is a story about a pattern that runs through every gospel, that runs through the whole ministry of Jesus, that tells you something staggering about who he was and what he was doing when nobody was watching. Every time Jesus was alone, something enormous was happening. Stay with me. The first time the Gospels tell us Jesus was fully alone, it lasts 40 days. Matthew chapter 4. Luke chapter 4. Jesus has just been baptized in the Jordan River. The sky split open. A voice came from heaven and said things that grown men do not forget. And then, the very next thing that happens, the Spirit leads him into the wilderness. Not into a city, not into a synagogue, into the wilderness. The Greek word the Gospel writers use for wilderness is eremos. It means empty, desolate, a place without people. The specific area scholars believe this refers to is the Judean wilderness east of Jerusalem, a brutal stretch of land that drops toward the Dead Sea, where the temperatures swing from scorching to freezing and the terrain is so unforgiving that Roman soldiers avoided it where possible. Jesus goes there alone for 40 days. He eats nothing. You have to sit with that. 40 days. Most people reach the edge of what they can handle in about 24 hours without food. The hunger Jesus would have experienced by day 40 is not the hunger you feel before dinner. It is a full-body collapse. Every system in the human body beginning to consume itself. And that is when the enemy arrives. We call what follows the temptation. But watch what the enemy actually says. He says, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become bread." He is not offering bread. He is attacking an identity. The voice from heaven just declared who Jesus was. And the enemy's first move, in a moment of maximum physical weakness, maximum isolation, maximum vulnerability, is to put a question mark after the word of God. If Jesus does not perform to prove himself. He does not summon bread. He does not explain himself. He quotes Deuteronomy, a book written for a people who also spent 40 years in a wilderness, and he says, "Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." He defeats the enemy with the same word the enemy tried to undermine. The pattern resets. 3 times the enemy comes. 3 times Jesus holds. And then the angels come and minister to him. Here is what most people miss about that scene. The angels do not come until after. Not during the 40 days. Not during the 3 temptations. After. When the work is done, when the wilderness is survived, when the identity has been held and tested and confirmed, then the angels come. The first time Jesus was alone, he was being proven. Not for God's sake. God knew what was there. For ours. The second time the Gospels show us Jesus alone, the stakes are different. Luke chapter 6, verse 12. Jesus is about to make the most consequential staffing decision in the history of the world. He is about to select 12 men, 12 specific human beings, who will carry everything he teaches into every corner of the earth, who will write documents that will be read by billions of people across 2,000 years, who will die for what he tells them. 12 men, out of thousands of followers. out of a world of millions. How does he make that choice? He goes up to a mountain, alone, and he prays all night. All night. Not an hour. Not until he has an answer. All night. You have stayed up all night before, for a flight, for a deadline, for a newborn. You know what your mind is like at 3 in the morning. You know how thought quality degrades. How decisions made in that condition carry a particular kind of weight and regret. Jesus stays in that condition voluntarily, all night long, praying to his Father. And when morning comes, he descends from the mountain and calls 12 names. Simon, whom he renames Peter. Andrew, Peter's brother. James and John, who will later be called the sons of thunder. And if you knew them, you would understand why. Philip. Bartholomew. Matthew, the former tax collector, who would have been socially despised by half the men he was being grouped with. Thomas. James, the son of Alphaeus. Simon the Zealot, a political revolutionary being placed in a room with a man who worked for the Roman occupation. Judas, the son of James. And Judas Iscariot, who would betray him. Jesus knew all 12 of them completely. He knew what Thomas would doubt. He knew what Peter would deny. He knew what Judas would do. He called all 12 of them anyway. The second time Jesus was alone, he was interceding, making choices on behalf of others that would cost him everything. And it was worth every sleepless hour. Now watch what happens after the feeding of the 5,000. This is one of the most spectacular miracles in all 4 Gospels. 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish, and somehow 5,000 men eat until they are full, with 12 baskets of leftovers. The crowd is electrified. John tells us in chapter 6 that the people are so overwhelmed by what they have seen that they are about to take Jesus by force and make him king. And Jesus, right at the peak of the crowd's enthusiasm, right at the moment when any ordinary man would ride that wave, dismisses the disciples, sends away the crowd, and goes up the mountain alone. Matthew chapter 14, verse 23. He was there alone. The Greek word is monos. Alone. Only. By himself. The crowd wants to make him king. His disciples want to stay with him. And Jesus goes up the mountain alone in the evening and stays there until the 4th watch of the night, which is somewhere between 3 and 6 in the morning. Think about what he is doing. He is not resting. The disciples' boat is caught in a storm on the Sea of Galilee. He can see it from the mountain. He stays on the mountain anyway, watching, praying, interceding, until the moment when the storm is at its worst and the disciples are at the end of their strength. And then he walks down to them, across the water. But here is what I want you to see. The moment between the mountain and the water. The moment when Jesus, alone at 3 in the morning on a hillside in Galilee, looks out at a black and churning sea and decides it is time. That moment is what was happening in the solitude. He was not hiding from the crowd. He was not avoiding the storm. He was in conversation with his Father about the storm, about the disciples, about the precise moment to move. Here is what most people miss. Jesus did not go to the mountain after the miracle to recover. He went to the mountain to prepare for the next one. The 3rd time Jesus was alone, he was praying for you. He was praying for people who were about to need him in the middle of the night. If you have been watching this channel for a while, you know what we do here. We go deep into the text, past the Sunday school summary, into the geography and the Greek and the things the commentators usually gloss over. If that is the kind of thing you want every week, subscribe now so you do not miss what is coming. There is a video coming soon about what Jesus actually said in the garden, the full Aramaic behind the prayers, that I think will change the way you read the Gospels. Hit subscribe. Come back for that. Now we are getting closer to the garden. But first, Luke chapter 5, verse 16. A verse that most people read past without stopping. The text says, Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Often. This is not a one-time event. This is not a crisis response. This is a discipline, practice, a pattern built into the rhythm of Jesus' ministry so consistently that the gospel writer mentions it almost as a footnote. Of course he was doing this, he was always doing this. The word for withdrew is the same root as eremos, the wilderness word. Jesus is not just finding quiet corners. He is going to desolate places, empty places, places where there is nothing between him and the Father. And here is where Origen, the 3rd century Christian scholar, offers something remarkable. In his commentary on Luke, Origen writes that Jesus withdrew not because he needed to escape the crowds, but because he understood something about prayer that the crowds did not. That sustained intercession requires sustained solitude. That the kind of prayer Jesus was doing, carrying names, carrying burdens, carrying the weight of what his ministry was building toward, could not happen in a room full of people. The withdrawals were not retreats from ministry. They were the engine of ministry. Every healing, every teaching, every confrontation with religious leaders, all of it was downstream of what was happening in those lonely places. Pay attention to this. The things that amazed people about Jesus in public were the overflow of what he was receiving from the Father in private. You want to know why Jesus never seemed rattled? Why he could look at a storm and speak to it? Why he could stand in front of Pilate in chains and seem, against all reason, like the one with authority? Because he had been with his Father, again and again and again, in eremose places, in mountain darkness, in pre-dawn gardens. The solitude was not the absence of power. The solitude was where the power came from. Now, the garden, Gethsemane. The name means oil press. It is named for the olive press that was likely on the property. A large stone was used to crush olives until the oil ran out. The historians tell us that olive groves like the one at Gethsemane were common on the slopes of the Mount of Olives, used by families for generations. Josephus, writing about the siege of Jerusalem decades after the crucifixion, notes that the Romans had to cut down the olive trees in that area to build their siege works. Those trees were ancient even then. Jesus knew this garden. The Gospels tell us he went there often. It was a familiar place. And on the night of his arrest, he goes there one more time. He takes 11 disciples with him. He leaves 8 of them near the entrance. He takes Peter, James, and John, the 3 who were with him at the Transfiguration, the 3 who saw his face shine like the sun, and he brings them deeper into the garden. And then he goes further still, alone. 30 meters, some scholars estimate. Close enough to see them. Far enough that what happens next is between him and his Father. And then Luke tells us something that has stopped readers cold for 2,000 years. He tells us that Jesus was in agonia. The Greek word agonia. We get our word agony from it, but the original meaning is more specific than that. Agonia refers to the anguish of a soldier before a battle he knows is coming. The preparation terror. The full-body awareness of what is ahead. And Luke adds something that no other gospel writer includes. He says the sweat of Jesus became like great drops of blood falling to the ground. This condition, hematidrosis, is documented in medical literature. It occurs under conditions of extreme psychological stress, when the capillaries near the sweat glands rupture and blood mixes with sweat. It is real. It is rare. It is what happens to the human body when the mind is under pressure so severe that the circulatory system begins to break. Jesus sweat blood in the garden, and he prayed, "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." He prays that prayer 3 times. 3 times he comes back to the disciples. 3 times he finds them sleeping. 3 times he returns to the Father. The disciples do not know what to do with their own eyelids. They are, as Mark tells us, very heavy. They sleep through the most important night of the 1st century. But something else is happening in the garden. Luke tells us that an angel appears and strengthens Jesus. One angel, not a choir, not a visitation like the resurrection. One angel, sent to strengthen a man who is about to carry the weight of the world through the night alone. And here is the thing I want you to carry out of this video. The disciples asked Jesus early in his ministry to teach them to pray. He gave them a pattern, a prayer that billions of people have said out loud in almost every language on earth. And at the center of that prayer is a line, "Your will be done." In the garden, Jesus prays that line for himself, out loud, alone, in the dark, while his friends sleep. He prays the prayer he taught them. He lives what he taught. And then he gets up. He walks back to the disciples. He says, "Rise, let us go. Here comes the one who will betray me." He gets up. This is not a story about a man who was broken by his circumstances. This is not a story about God abandoning his son. This is not a story about the failure of prayer. This is a story about a man who prayed the prayer, who said, "Not my will, but yours," and then walked forward into everything that prayer was going to cost him. There is one more moment, and it is the loneliest moment in all of Scripture: the cross. Jesus has been on the cross for 3 hours of darkness. Matthew and Mark both record it. At the 9th hour, 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cries out in a loud voice. The words are in Aramaic, the language he actually spoke, preserved raw in the Greek text. "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani." My God, why have you forsaken me? This is a quote. The opening line of Psalm 22, written by David 1,000 years earlier. A psalm that begins in desolation and ends in praise, that describes a righteous sufferer surrounded by enemies, that contains details that seem to describe crucifixion before crucifixion existed as a method of execution. Jesus, on the cross, recites the first line of that psalm. Every Jewish listener in earshot would have known what the full psalm says. They would have known it ends with the words, "He has not despised or scorned the suffering of the afflicted one. He has not hidden his face from him, but has listened to his cry for help." The cry of dereliction is also a declaration of the end of the psalm. The beginning points to the end. The darkness is not the whole story. But in the moment, in the actual experience of the cross, the word Jesus uses is the Greek word eklipo. Forsaken, abandoned, left behind. The same word used to describe an eclipse, when the light source is cut off and darkness covers the earth. There was darkness. Matthew tells us there was actual darkness over the land for those 3 hours. Darkness while the eternal Son of God experienced, in full, the isolation that sin produces, separation from the Father, the thing humans have felt since the Garden of Eden, the thing every person who has ever felt spiritually alone was feeling. He felt it too. He felt it completely. He went into the darkest of all dark places, alone with nails in his wrists, and he said the words. And then he said, "It is finished." Not almost finished. Not mostly finished. Finished. The word is tetelestai, a single word, an accounting term. It was written on a debt certificate when a debt had been paid in full. When you owed something and someone paid it, the paper was stamped with that word. Tetelestai, paid in full. He said the word and bowed his head and gave up his spirit. And here is where it comes back to the garden, that Garden of Gethsemane, where he had sweated blood and prayed 3 times and asked if there was another way. There was not another way. The Father's answer to the prayer of the garden was the cross. And Jesus knew that somewhere in the prayer and got up anyway. The loneliness of the cross was the answer to every lonely prayer ever prayed in the garden. I want to leave you with 3 things. The first is this: Jesus was alone more than you probably realized. The gospel writers did not hide it. They recorded it almost matter-of-factly because it was simply how he lived. He withdrew to lonely places. He went up mountains in the dark. He spent full nights in prayer before full days of ministry. The public power of Jesus was the overflow of his private life with the Father. If you want to understand Jesus, you have to look at what he did when nobody was watching. The second is this: every time Jesus was alone, he was doing something for someone else. The wilderness, proving faithfulness for a world that needed a faithful Savior. The mountain before choosing the 12, interceding for 11 men who would one day lay their lives down for the message he gave them. The hillside over Galilee, praying through a storm he was about to still on behalf of his exhausted friends. The garden, carrying the weight of the cup so that no one else would have to. The cross, taking the full experience of abandonment so that you would never have to be truly alone again. And the third is this, and I want you to hold this one. There is a moment in the history of the world when the most powerful person who ever lived knelt on cold ground in a garden he knew well and said, "Your will, not mine." He did not say it from a position of peace. He said it from a position of terror. He said it with blood on his face. He said it after asking 3 times if it could be different. He said it and meant it and got up and walked forward. And that is what courage actually looks like. Not the absence of fear. Not the absence of pain. Not the absence of an honest question asked to the Father in the dark. It is the willingness to get up and walk toward the answer, even when the answer is costly. Which of these moments hit you the hardest, the wilderness, the garden, or the cross? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you have never sat with Jesus in the lonely places, if you have only seen the miracles and the crowds and the sermons on the Mount, I want to encourage you to go back to the Gospels and look for the withdrawals. Look for the eremos. Look for the mountains and the dark hours and the gardens. That is where you will find the heartbeat of who he was. Subscribe if you want to keep going deeper. There is more where this came from. And until next time, do not be afraid. He has been to the lonely place so that you would know you are not alone there.